To win this beautiful Hummel Everton FC 2023-24 home shirt couldn't be easier. All you have to do is make your way to the Royal Blue Everton FC YouTube channel, subscribe and leave a comment on any video saying you want to enter the competition. That's it. It's that easy. Remember, become a subscriber and leave a comment. Entries close on September 24th at 11 p.m. UK time, and a winner will be drawn at random on September 25th. Good luck.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast, and as you can see we're al fresco today. We're taking advantage of the Indian summer that we're enjoying currently on Merseyside, although it's actually a bit muggy at the moment, not quite hit the temperatures of recent days, but it's fresh enough for us to be outside. I'm your host today, Chris Beesley, joined by Everton correspondent Joe Thomas and our regular guest Gavin Buckland. Plenty to talk about as usual, and then hot as off the press as it were, just minutes ago, Demarai Gray's transfer from Everton to El Etikaf. I'm not sure if I got the pronunciation correctly on that one, but it's a done deal now, undisclosed fee, believed to be in the region of £8 million. That's been completed. If I start with you, Gav, what your thoughts on all this? Because it's come as a surprise, really. Gray, we expected to go for most of the summer, then now it's obviously come after the English transfer window closed last week.
Yeah, first of all, al fresco, that sounds like a Saudi club, doesn't it, really? Yeah, it's inevitable. On the pod on Monday we were discussing this, and once you have a spat that's been made public between a player and a manager, and I know Dyche has said stuff since, there's inevitable that it's going to be a parting of the ways. Bear in mind that Gray's also in the last year of his contract. Everton need the cash. Gray's not necessarily in the first choice lineup. You know, on the bench is probably the best he can hope for. RB does give us an option. Then it was just inevitable that he was going to go, I think, and so I think nobody's surprised. I think I'm surprised in the context that Dyche said on Saturday that he thought he was going to be staying, and now saying 5 days later he's going. But it was inevitable, and whatever fee, I think you've said this undisclosed, but I don't know what that means, 8 to 10 million. I think that's a decent fee for a player that we bought for 1.7 million. Yeah. So that's virtually all profit now. So yeah, it makes sense for everybody. Yeah. Whether he wants to go to Saudi, of course, is a different kettle of fish. But yeah, not surprised, and then a couple of extra quid for us, but we do lose a little bit on the playing side. Yeah,
I mean, the way Gav speaks about that, I mean, it would be seen, I guess, as a good deal for all parties if it had been done when Everton was still in a position to bring in replacements. That's not the case, and like as Gav has mentioned, the way the whole thing has panned out, it's all been rather unsavoury.
Yeah, I think it's a deal that's good for the bank balance, and that is important. It's particularly important given Everton's current financial situation, but it's clearly bad for the squad and the options that Sean Dyche has available to him, especially again with the departures of Alex Iwobi and Neil Maupay and Tom Cannon on the final day of the deadline. You know, I think looking at those departures, even when coming off the back of Saturday night, when Sean Dyche had been quite vocal in the idea that Gray was going to be reintegrated back into the squad, he clearly, judging by his comments to myself and to the club media, clearly saw a pathway into, he saw a future at Everton for Gray. I specifically asked him, does he expect Gray to remain? Obviously cited the still ongoing Saudi Arabian transfer window at that time, and that of others such as Qatar, where Alan left in September last season. And he said at that minute he expected Demarai Gray to remain an Everton player. So, I think this is probably the one deal that we spent the whole summer expecting to happen, certainly after Demarai Gray came back from his Gold Cup exploits with Jamaica, had a good tournament out there, and it felt like for a long time this was, as speculation as interest seemed to wane or not materialise in the likes of Jordan Pickford and Amadou Onana, probably the two diamonds that Everton had, the two players that could attract really significant transfer fees. I think Demarai Gray and the opportunity to sell him became the most obvious way of getting an injection of funds into the club. And to get an injection of funds into the club for a player that, even during some of the more difficult moments at the back end of last season, still didn't feature within Sean Dyche's first choice 11. And so it was very unlikely that he was going to do so again coming into this season. Obviously not involved in pre-season at all, and not involved in any of the first 4 Premier League matches or the Carabao Cup game against Doncaster, Dyche citing fitness concerns. I think the way this has ended has been particularly unsavoury. It's been another drama that Everton could do without. And it just hasn't really been particularly edifying, I don't think, the way things have materialised this week. It feels like a predictable ending that perhaps could have been mitigated and by action being taken earlier, but unfortunately it hasn't, and that has left Everton in a harder position than they probably would have preferred to have been in, albeit the finances have been strengthened.
Yeah. Gav, Joe's mentioned there, Dyche's post-match comments at Bramall Lane seem to indicate that Gray would be staying, and we sort of thought he was going to be brought back into the fold after what has been a summer where he's not been involved. But something happened there, didn't it? And that something being that his Instagram post on the Sunday with his comments, and then that was followed by the manager's response, a very detailed response within a in-house club interview.
Yeah, it's when it goes public, it's a bit unedifying, isn't it, really? I thought Dyche was obliged to come out with it, what he said. There was some bits of it for me that perhaps didn't make sense, in that, Gray said he didn't want to train. Well, it's a brave person to say to Sean Dyche you don't want to train. Yeah. And also it was reported early on in August that that there was a deal with Fulham that had been done, or looked like it'd be done, subject to Everton getting some players in. Yeah. So it's not as if like it was a big surprise to Dyche that Gray said I've done a deal with whoever you believe to be Fulham. That appeared to be in the case, and that was made public. So that doesn't make sense to me. But Gray shouldn't have come out and said what he did. I think that's not a great look, and it forces Dyche to make it even more public comments, which we criticise the club. People criticise the club for not saying stuff when they do saying stuff. I think in this case it's fully justified. And yeah, it's just, as Joe said, it's all a little bit unsavoury. Is it just basically one of them things? The problem is communication here. What Gray thought he was doing and what Dyche thought Gray was doing were two completely different things. And ultimately, it's led to the departure of a player that, if he had gone in mid-August, we may have had some additional money to spend. But given what we sort of understand about club finances, it appears every single penny we get isn't going on players. At the moment, it's going on the running of the club and Bramley Moore. So, yeah, I thought the Gray statement wasn't great. Dyche's response was expected and fully justified. But in some respects, it left more questions than answers, really, over the sort of timeline of events and why certain things happen. So it's still sad when a player leaves on this note. I think it's how you leave an organisation that's important, isn't it? And I think I don't like to see players leaving under a cloud. Yeah. To be honest with you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, it's telling, as it's been mentioned already, that the fact that when his announcement of the deal was made by Everton at 10:30, there was no wishing Demarai well, in the way that those three exits on transfer deadline day, Tom Cannon, Alex Iwobi, and even Jean-Philippe Gabamin, who had his contract ripped up, all were offered that courtesy. None of that for Gray. Your thoughts on, obviously, the initial Instagram post from him explaining his situation, and then the subsequent response from the manager?
Yeah, I didn't like the Demarai Gray post. Sean Dyche in his video after, in his rebuttal to Gray, was saying how it's not his way, he doesn't like it, this dirty laundry, to be aired out in public. I think most of us would agree that that's a preferable position. And whether or not Gray was responding to my story from the evening before, obviously I put out that Dyche had effectively opened the door for him to come back, and that's what sparked Gray's response that he's not coming back, or doesn't think he can come back. I'm not sure, but I didn't like Demarai Gray's decision to do that in the first place. Kind of similar to what Gav says, I think the club had every right to come back and kind of respond to that. I can understand why they would have tried to have seized the initiative. I think they're justified to have done that. I think they're well within their rights. But I'm still not convinced that it's a situation that has been handled particularly well by all parties. Like, without knowing the ins and outs of what's gone on behind the scenes, I'm not willing to accept this as anything really more than 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Because what I struggle to see is that I struggle to see how this wasn't a predictable ending to this whole show. This isn't clearly, I suspected this when we spoke on Monday, but clearly when Dyche started going on about claiming that Demarai Gray had refused to train and things like this isn't a situation that this isn't a relationship that has dramatically deteriorated after the final whistle at Bramall Lane. Clearly this has been a scenario that has been ongoing for, if not days before that game and days where the transfer window was still open, then possibly weeks. We know that obviously Demarai Gray hasn't been involved. Dyche has never said that Gray was injured, but he has always cited fitness concerns whenever I've asked him, why is he not? Obviously, when I asked him why he wasn't involved in Sheffield United, Dyche then opened up and said, well, it is fitness, but it's also the noise surrounding his future. And it's just, if there was this battle ongoing behind the scenes between the personalities, and there was a suggestion that Demarai Gray was unhappy, and if things were as bad as Dyche portrayed them to have been in his interview, then I struggled to see. I don't understand, and the club might have had assurances from the player in his camp, maybe, I don't know. But I'm struggling to see how they thought that there'd be a happy ending to this, an amicable ending where Gray would end up being reintegrated into the first team and give it all. It looks like this mess was predictable, and if it was predictable, then it was preventable. And you have a scenario where, bearing in mind there were interested parties in Demarai Gray, well, it's difficult to see how this wasn't resolved when the transfer window was still open and when Everton could potentially do something with the funds that were available, and this could be a much happier situation for everyone. I think that there was a solution, judging by what everybody's saying and what we've seen with our own eyes. I think there was a solution where everybody could have ended up happy here. In the end, I think everyone's ended up unhappy. I think we've ended up with the only possible realistic conclusion, but it's one that leaves Everton weaker going into this new season. And I think there are probably two things to watch out for that might kind of give us a bit more insight into what's going on behind the scenes. And one is, we've spoken about this, and I've written about this, that there's been this whole thing about whether Jack Harrison, upon his arrival, was given Demarai Gray's shirt number. Jack Harrison was number 11 at Leeds. Now, to be perfectly clear, there's nothing from the club that suggested that. He's still number 0 on the Premier League website, on the Premier League and the club's website. So that's Jack Harrison is still 0 there. Yes. Demarai Gray was still number 11 there. But it was quite interesting to see that Jack Harrison, in all the promotional material following his signature, there's nothing there that's revealed his shirt number. There's nothing there that, as opposed to people like Dan Juma, it was clear what number he was going to wear. Beto, it's announced he's going to be number 14. There was nothing there for Jack Harrison. And again, like I spoke about on Monday, when it got to the Everton squad list in the Sheffield United programme on Saturday, lo and behold, Jack Harrison says number 11, Demarai Gray isn't to be seen. So if Jack Harrison is to now get the number 11 shirt, that might point to maybe that was part of the plan. Obviously, it might be purely innocent. That might have not been the case at all. And obviously, the fact that it's now free means that why not give it to Jack Harrison? But I think that'll be interesting. And I think the second one is, Jamaica have 2 international games over this break. It felt clearly that Demarai Gray's Instagram post, the parting shot of his goodbye, is, "I am match fit. I wanted to play." Now, that's clearly a reference, or it very strongly feels to me like a reference to Sean Dyche's comments that he's not fit to play. Or if he goes and plays, 75 minutes twice for Jamaica now, then that is going to be interesting, because I think it's very clear. I think it's very clear to us that Sean Dyche has his own personal view of what match fitness is and a threshold at which players can be available, and I think it appears to be that's higher than a lot of other people's. I actually think that's a good thing. I think that the most obvious example, is the handling of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think Sean Dyche has handled Dominic Calvert-Lewin's efforts to be a fit part of that Everton squad very, very well. But obviously, it is going to suggest that there's clearly a long way between where Demarai Gray views his fitness as and where Sean Dyche has been publicly willing to say his fitness is. And if Demarai Gray goes and plays 135 minutes over the course of the next 2 games for Jamaica, then that suggests that the situation is perhaps a little bit muddier than it would have been. And that is problematic, because I do think that when you look at the last few weeks, the opening to Everton's season, Everton haven't been naming a full set of players on that bench, certainly of senior players, and probably was a job that Demarai Gray could do, even if his exit was expected. Is he the best finisher? Is he a part of an Everton starting 11 that you would be confident that would stay in this Premier League? Perhaps not. would he have finished the chances, or at least one of the chances that Decore and Neil Maupay had against Wolves on the opening day? Sorry, Fulham on the opening day of the season, maybe against Wolves. Perhaps, and it may well be that Everton aren't sitting with 2 home defeats if Demarai Gray was in a position where he could play then. And it's tricky. We don't know everything, of course. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be, but I do think that at best it feels like there's been a miscalculation on Everton's part, that they believe that, judging by what Dyche's comments were on Saturday, that there was a belief that they could bring him back into the squad and that he could play a role in this season following the departures of Cannon, Maupay and Alex Iwobi, and clearly that's not been the case.
Yeah. Do you think, Gavin, it's just been a set of circumstances where the music stopped and then all of a sudden we've expected Demarai Gray to have been out the door, Alex Iwobi's gone instead, because the difference being that Alex Iwobi was someone who basically played all the time under Sean Dyche, whereas Demarai Gray had been someone who was regular under Frank Lampard and the other man, and obviously was brought in by Rafael Benitez, but then wasn't played in the usual wide positions, was played up front by Dyche. So, like I said, Joe's alluded to perhaps a scenario where we thought he was going to go, but then the transfer window was closed. He's still there, and maybe he feels that the only way to get this deal over the line now is to go and force the issue online and make these comments public.
Yeah, possibly. You would. It's a strange one, really. Yeah, I get that, and I was thinking that myself, but it goes back to what Joe's saying. It could have all been done early, couldn't it? He said, I could have had a positive result for everybody, which I would have imagined would have been moving to, say, Fulham before the start of the season, because the talk of the Fulham was early August, wasn't it? Where we could have got a bit of money, maybe to plan, maybe to buy somebody else. And as you say, Chris, you don't know. Yeah. You don't know. Perhaps he's the timing of it is probably the key thing. It's after it was transfer window had finished on Sunday, hadn't it?
Yeah, it was Friday, wasn't it?
So obviously he's wanted to move by the end of the transfer window. It's not happened for the reasons what Dyche had said, and so therefore I'm going to constructively dismiss myself from the club. Yeah. For want of a better phrase, by publicly criticising the club, or inferring criticism of the club and the manager, and therefore what will happen then is there will be a bit of a fallout, and then I will go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a scenario, but it could have all been handled in a far better way before then, I believe, as Joe's alluded to, and ultimately from this is Gray got the move he really wants.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is this his ideal venue? I'm not sure. I don't think we've heard the last from Gray from this, by the way. I think once he gets his foot under the table in Saudi, it won't surprise me if there's a further statement about what has gone on, which may be for interesting reading. But you're right. I think it's the timing of it and the nature of it indicates that actually I still want to force your way out here.
Yeah.
And that's sadly what's happened, I suppose, for everybody concerned.
Yeah, because Joe, when we look at the way that the whole thing has panned out, with Gray, is it the fact that he couldn't get a move to another Premier League club? Fulham, as Gav says, has been mooted there, but this is a player. Everton got him from Bayer Leverkusen, relatively modest fee, 1.7 million. He was only there for a short spell, obviously, after his time at Leicester City, and for all that, his twinkling toes and those moments, spectacular moments. We were at the Etihad last season when that equalised against Manchester City, but then he hasn't scored from open play since then. And then before that, I think you have to go 8 months from his wonder goal, his winner against Arsenal, spectacular winner. It proved to be, I think, the last win under Benitez, before his next goal against Nottingham Forest. Unfortunately, those magic moments were too few and far between, so perhaps that's been the problem, and the reason he's ended up as a player who should be at the peak of his powers now at 27. He's going into the Saudi League, is that maybe somebody from the Premier League just wasn't offering that deal that could have got him out of Goodison Park?
Yeah, well, I think he's probably ended up in Saudi Arabia now because it's the only place that he can go.
Yeah.
there aren't options to go to another Premier League or British or European side after the transfer deadline closed on Friday. I think he gave an interview after during the summer where he kind of suggested that he still believed that he still had the ambition of playing Champions League football. And I think that obviously, when players set their ambitions out, they're going to reach for the size. You want that. But it was very much the type of interview which to me suggests that he didn't see his immediate future. If he saw it away from Everton, he didn't see it in a non-mainstream league. And I think it's still fair to describe Saudi Arabia. Well, you can't play in the Champions League currently with a Saudi Arabian side, although there are reports are trying to somehow force a way into the European.
Well.
So yeah, look, I think we can all understand why Everton would sell Demarai Gray during the summer transfer window. I think we can all understand why Gray might not be part of Sean Dyche's first team plans as well. I've got no dispute with the club or with Sean Dyche on either of those things. His sale did feel like an opportunity to get much needed money without losing a valuable asset. Which they've done a couple of times this summer, but it wasn't the case with someone like, say, Alex Iwobi, who still had a role to play, I think, in the first team. When you look back on Gray's Everton career, when we look at the finance of it, it's clearly a good piece of business for Everton. They've made a significant profit on him, and I think he's a player who has certainly been worth the £1.7 million or so that they committed to him in the first place. Has he set the world alight? No. He's been one of very few players of the past 2 years who's been capable of producing a moment of magic. But obviously moments of magic help every now and then, but they aren't. You can't build a season around someone doing something special once every 8 or 9 games. Yeah. I do think this kind of comes back to my point at the beginning of the season when Everton had a number of injuries and players yet to arrive in the transfer window. I do think that for a big chunk towards the end of last season, when Dominic Calvert-Lewin was absent, he was the best that Everton could do. He was the best of a bad set of options. It was notable that Sean Dyche went to him last. When he came in, he went to Dominic Calvert-Lewin first. Dominic Calvert-Lewin got injured in his game against Arsenal. Then he went to Ellis Sims against Liverpool. Then he went to Neil Maupay, and then he went to Demarai Gray up top. And it was notable. I think the Forest game was the first time that Gray played in that role, and clearly it's not his best role, but it was notable how much better Everton were then. And albeit square peg in a round hole, this is probably some of the things that we'll never notice. And it probably is fair to take Dyche at face value on the fitness things with Demarai Gray, because why would Dyche want to cut his own nose off to spite his own face? But it does seem a little bit unfortunate that even whilst there might have been a few problems at the beginning of the season in the relationship, and even if there might have been a few doubts over Gray's fitness, it's very difficult to see how he couldn't have played a role in those first, if you include the Carabao Cup game. Obviously Sheffield United was after the transfer window. Those first 2 or 3 league games in the Carabao Cup game, it's difficult to see how, when Everton had so few options going forward, there wasn't a role that he could play even if off the bench. But I don't think this is a departure that will sadden Everton fans. I don't think that there'll be people that are hailing Demarai Gray a hero. He's had an impact in 2 years. He's proved good value. He goes for a good fee. And just to stress again, his actions in all of this that we've seen, his public actions that we've seen since the transfer deadline day close aren't particularly good. They shouldn't be hailed either. So that's it, really. It's a good piece of business. I don't think that the first team 11 loses too much from the departure of Gray. It's the squad depth that's an issue. I do think that's a serious issue that this Everton side have got to deal with, and that's the problem. And also that I think that, let's say, this is probably a situation that could have been resolved much more amicably for all parties a couple of weeks ago, and it's difficult to see why that wasn't the case. Yeah,
just finally on this issue, Gav, as Joe alludes to there, it's about where this leaves the squad. Have Everton been left short now? I know we've got Jack Harrison to come back in there though, but with this deal coming after the English deadline had shot and they can't bring in a replacement, how concerned are you by Everton's options between now and January having to get through with one fewer body now?
Or are we one fewer body compared to a week ago? But if you see since the end of last season, say, in wide areas we've had, Danjuma plays wide, Jack Harrison plays wide, James Garner's shown that can play wide out a bit. That's not ideal.
Yeah.
So we have got more options than what we had last season.
Dwight McNeil is coming back to fitness.
Yeah. So we have got more options, I think, than we had last year. Albeit we've also lost Iwobi. So I think as another as a bum on a seat, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
On the substitutes bench, but in terms of first choice and wide options that we've got, I think Gray is expendable.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, because of our transfer business, and I'm sure that's also informed the club's thinking.
Yeah.
If we'd have not bought Harrison and Dan Juma, I think
Yeah.
he would be saying, "You're not going anywhere, mate."
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah.
I think he's probably surplus in those areas, but just and he has shown a bit of flexibility. He has played up front,
Yeah.
hasn't he? But I think that's probably informed our decision. The fact that he is expendable, as I say, because we've brought other options in since the end of last season. We may once said the funny. Something about Gray is that as a player, we saw him was mentioned about Shane Warne, what he said about Monty Panesar once, that Monty Panesar's not played 150 games for England. He's played the same game 150 times.
Okay.
And I think Gray's like that at Everton, isn't he? I don't know how many appearances he's made, 70, 60, but he's basically played the same game in all 70 appearances, hasn't he? I can guarantee what it would have been, a couple of dribbles, a couple of iffy set pieces, a few times where it used to infuriate me was where he'd be offside, but he's looking down the line from a long ball or something.
Yeah.
And he was never inconsistent at all, because that implies that there was massive peaks and lows. It was just always, to me, he was always about the same. But where he was inconsistent was very occasionally those moments he's spoken about against Arsenal, against Man United. But other than that, I found him a very, very sort of flatline performance, really. Not great, not terrible, but just not really doing a lot. And so from that perspective, I don't think we're missing too much on the playing side, especially if we brought other options in. I think like Dan Jim looks a far more dynamic player, to me. And we've obviously got to see what Harrison does. We have got McNeil, so I'm not gonna sort of lose sleep over the playing side with him. But it is one less on the subs bench.
Yeah.
Another empty spec.
Yeah.
But no, I'm all right with them going.
Yeah. And briefly to finish, I mean, obviously the players are away this week. It's the international break, but I mean that has brought its own news. Joe, when Jarrad Branthwaite was drawn from the England under-21s, and you thought that was particularly curious. The wording of that with his injury.
Yeah, I did. Just to finish on Gray before that, I think the club do deserve a degree of credit for just getting it done. Once that Instagram post went out, clearly they could have carried on the fight. They didn't. They found a solution that worked for them, and I think that's probably deserves some credit for having the maturity to do that, rather than just continue the battle and have a player there that perhaps wasn't going to contribute but was still taking a wage. Jarrad Branthwaite's an interesting one, just because I don't think it was Dyche's intention for Jarrad Branthwaite to be starting Premier League games this early into the season. Clearly he began the season with the partnership of Tarkowski and Keane, and I think he probably would have preferred to have carried on doing that, but Keane became the solution to trying to deal or show an intent to deal with the problems that were emerged after that Aston Villa game, when Everton just as a whole were absolutely atrocious. But the interesting thing with Branthwaite is, and the club said this in the statement, is that he's been dealing with a groin issue. He's withdrawn from the England under 21 wants to deal with a groin issue, which he's now going to have treatment at Finch Farm during this fortnight over. And they said in that he picked this up on international duty in the summer, so that means that there's only one way of reading that, and that's that Branthwaite's been playing with a groin injury for 5 weeks or so. And again, I find that intriguing, because we talk about this kind of concept of Sean Dyche having a high degree of fitness, a high fitness threshold. Well, clearly he was willing to relax that when it came to Jarrad Branthwaite's situation, because obviously it's a player that's been playing with an injury. So I don't know if maybe personality comes into some of this as well, or maybe it was so minor that he was comfortable with him when playing with it. But I just thought that was an interesting fact, the fact that obviously Branthwaite has been playing with fitness concerns for a long time, and then you juxtapose that with Demarai Gray, who has apparently had fitness concerns for all this period, probably a player that, for all that we've said about the fact that we don't see him as a long-term solution to Everton's issues, probably could have helped the early games of helped the squad during the early games of the window. And it just shows that on the one hand you could perhaps say a flexibility from Sean Dyche to kind of judge each situation it is, in which case fair enough. On the other hand, it is interesting that sometimes that high threshold of fitness isn't the be all and end all, because obviously Branthwaite's been playing with it. So clubs say that he's expected to be back after the international break. Well, hopefully that means Arsenal. I mean, after the international break could be it could be any time after. But I think if it felt like the inference there was this is going to be a very short term thing. Let's hope it's the case, because centre back, just like on the wing, just like everywhere else, is an area that Everton don't really have much cover, and that's I think is the big problem, because I think when you look at Everton's first 11, maybe when you look at their first 12, 13, maybe 14 players, I think we can all see how a situation where when they're fit, Dyche has something to work with here, particularly when you look at the weakness at the bottom end of the league, probably for Luton, probably for Sheffield, certainly in comparison to last season, when it felt like Leicester, felt like the teams that went down were all relatively strong. The league is definitely weaker this season. Hopefully it's a situation that Everton can get away with, but I do think that whilst this squad under Dyche has the capability of surviving this season, I do think they're going to need more luck with injuries than they've had over the past few seasons to get there. And in fairness, they are due a bit of luck on that front. They have had bad luck. Some of those injuries have been to players who have suffered persistent injury issues, and you could therefore say it's predictable that situation is handed, and Everton should have prepared for that. But they have had bad luck, and they are due some good luck on that front. So hopefully it comes through this season as they need it.
Yeah, I think that'll do us there. I can smell something smells good. It must be getting on for dinner time now, and we will have more for you next week as we continue to build up for Everton's Premier League return against Arsenal. I've been your host, Chris Beesley, not James Richardson. I've been joined by Gavin, Buckland and Joe Thomas. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast.